second week of insights into our research we are conducting at Elite Mind Academy Labs. So, hi, Valentina. It's good to have you back. You've been away this week.
Yeah, indeed. It's great to be back. Nice to jump straight back into things.
Great. So, hopefully, you all can hear Valentina very well this time because last time we know we had some issues with her audio. So, hopefully, this time you can hear all of the wisdom that she's got to offer.
Fingers crossed.
without without any issues. So, Valentina, do you want to share some research that we've been looking
Yeah,
at this week
absolutely.
and what we found?
Yeah, so we've been looking a little bit at kind of how to measure certain things in our life circumstances and the difference between measuring or kind of asking somebody about their circumstances and then also asking them, or instead asking them about their satisfaction with their life circumstances. And there's a real balance here because there's somebody could have all of the circumstances that one might say creates a happy life, the tick boxes you might think of: job, family, relationships, personal life, pleasures, etc. And still not feel satisfied with them, and vice versa. Somebody could have none of these circumstances but feel incredibly satisfied with their lives. So we've been looking at that relationship, and at what point do we, or kind of where do we weight the assessment on which side for which kinds of questions, which I think has been really interesting, right? Because we've been saying about how there's, at what point do we make that assessment of, let's say, somebody could be uh, an alcoholic, or they could be have things that are coming up in their lives, or difficulties that one might objectively say, oh, well, that must be detracting from your well-being. But this same person might say, but I'm really happy with my life as an alcoholic. I really like it. I have a good time. And so at what point do we say, okay, we need to weight this more towards looking at the physical health conditions rather than looking at someone's satisfaction with
Yeah.
it, to make a determination about their well-being? And vice versa, if somebody, say, was an exceptionally high earner and they were increasingly financially dissatisfied with their life, then maybe we want to weigh in and say that actually we could be working on their ability to feel satisfied.
And this is a very interesting dilemma, isn't it? Because I think, at the moment when we kind of started this research initially, we were looking at, the big question of how do you even measure well-being and health, right? Mental health, well-being, someone's resilience, because there are no any one established way to measure those, because all of those things are really, really subjective. So when we start digging into how exactly we do this, we come up with those, very interesting questions. To what extent your real life circumstances matter, and to what extent it's only your perception of it matter? So what
Mm.
is the weighting? And it's interesting when somebody says, okay, I'm happy with my life, but sometimes it also can be sign of ignorance, right? Because it's very common with, let's say some addictions, with alcoholism, where people say, well, I'm happy with the way I'm living, and there are some of these even kind of high functioning addicts, right? People who are addicted to, sometimes it's not necessarily, drugs, alcohol, or whatever. You might be
Behaviors.
addicted to, I don't know, ways of working, right? You might be workaholic in that way, and you are actually not even aware of the
Mm.
impact that has on your life, on your health, on well-being, on your family. So you will say, yeah, well, I'm happy, I'm really motivated with my work. And I think I did that same mistake as well, that it's very easy sometimes when you draw yourself into doing something that you really love, it's very easy to get lost in it, to the point that you become blind to everything else. So for us, if we are conducting that research and we want to highlight those issues and improve people's levels of self-awareness, how do we do that in the right way? So I think
Mm.
that's maybe the question for the audience. And if anyone is listening, right, imagine you are completing the survey, right? And we will say, rate your level of happiness about your relationship. And then there's going to be a little asterisk to say, but actually, you know what? It doesn't matter whether you have that relationship or not, what we are interested in is your level of happiness with your relationship status, whatever that's, you can be single and happy, you can be in relationship and unhappy, right? And to what extent do you think it's important for us to know whether you are in that relationship or not, and you're happy or not, and what's that weighting and the importance of it? And I think the interesting dilemma there is that even though we have a good intention of wanting to highlight that self-awareness and drive improvement, potentially by highlighting some issues in someone's life, we can make them miserable because now they are aware of it, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
how do we do this right?
How do we? And I think that's a really useful question to put out to listeners, because everybody will have different kind of perspectives on different areas, and I think that's also useful to know is, in how to measure where somebody's sensitivities lie as well, because somebody might be completely comfortable with you sharing feedback about their physical health, but don't feel comfortable about you sharing feedback or insights about their social relationships or things like that. So I think that can be a really useful point as well. How do we
Yeah,
measure someone's sensitivities? Is this something that we want to ask kind of pre-survey or pre-questionnaire or pre-assessment? Or is that whether there's any kind of triggers or sensitive spots? Equally, if there are things that people want to flag, I know this is an issue, like and I want to work on it, maybe that's something that we do pre-assessment as well. But I think it's a really fascinating
yeah,
topic, because there's so much literature and advice on kind of mindfulness and gratitude and acceptance and non-attachment and all of these things that essentially tell us that to emphasize shifting our perspective on our life circumstances. But at the same time, in our society, we're constantly being pushed to have everything and to achieve
yeah.
more and more in work and to buy into kind of these different areas that say we are supposed to be happy if we have this, that, and the other. And we live in the world, so we're going to have to marry these two sides in some way or another in practice in our lives, as well as for us in making these assessments.
That's interesting that you're pointing out these kind of sensitivity levels. I've kind of start making notes for myself about this, because what another very important bit that we need to consider in doing this kind of research and this kind of work is how comfortable people are speaking about those topics. So I think we were looking at, when we conducting some of those surveys and interviews, how comfortable people are talking about, let's say sex, sexuality, physical pleasure, their, I don't know, gender inequalities, their own addictions, their own, there is variety of topics that are very often taboo. And you'll remember that initially, where we screened a lot of other surveys out there, I think it was only one that actually looked at how happy you are with your sexual life, for example, right?
Yeah.
None of those touched, none of the other surveys actually even looked at that. And yet, our sexuality, our identity, our gender, our ability to experience pleasure is
Mm,
such a big important part of our health and well-being, right? And
absolutely.
yet it's completely excluded out of most health and well-being surveys, right?
Mm,
So again, how comfortable are we about talking about those things? And if we really want to make this kind of holistic well-being, we have to bring those topics on a table. And
absolutely.
yet, before that, we need to, yeah, I don't know, what do we need to do to prepare people for this, right? To make sure
Mm.
that they can comfortably talk about some of those issues and topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important to be part of the change, part of the solution, rather than thinking, oh, that sexuality and sexual pleasure is a topic that is taboo or it's unprofessional, so we won't ask about it.
Hmm.
That just exacerbates it and makes people more and more uncomfortable not talking about it. So we certainly want to be the people that ask about it, but it is understanding that it is a topic that a lot of people do feel sensitive about, and so we want to make sure we do it in the right way. I think that often, giving an option not to answer can be really useful in terms of helping somebody feel comfortable with the process of assessment, but also helping us understand what are these topics that people don't feel comfortable revealing information about. And
Yeah.
that's a really useful insight in itself. And even for the individuals, you know, if we can notice that somebody doesn't feel comfortable revealing information about, you know, say finances or sexuality as topics that people often do feel uncomfortable revealing information about, then that can help inform our support for them, or kind of
Yeah.
our advice. And I guess that kind of brings me on a little bit to looking at social relationships, because I think asking about those kinds of things can be a really useful way to tell how close, like the level of intimacy that somebody has in their social relationships. It's one thing asking, you know, how many close friends do you have? But what does close mean to you, and what
Yeah.
does close mean to me, and how do those relationships and those friendships actually support someone? So asking things like, do you feel like you could talk to your closest three friends about issues in your sex life, in your financial life, in your with your emotional well-being or your mental
Mm.
health, your physical health, etc., etc., I think can
Mm.
also help give us an indication of the level of comfort and closeness we can
Yeah.
see in those social
Yeah,
relationships.
I think you're right. These are really, really great points, because having support, very often those questions are being asked in a very, very generic way. How big is your circle? Do you have, the closest friend you can speak to? But actually, it doesn't dig in deeper to say, okay, are you comfortable discussing financial matters with the friends? Do you have somebody with who you can discuss, your business challenges, your personal challenges, your relationships, your sexual
Mm,
life, whatever that might be, right? So having someone that you can comfortably talk to about those issues in your life clearly shows the quality of support that they have, but also their ability to discuss those issues. Because if people are not willing or not able to discuss that, then our help and support to that is limited. Because
yeah.
most likely, if they're not willing to open up about this, they will not even give right information to us to be able to make those recommendations in the first place, right? So maybe here is as well a question to the audience. If anyone's listening, would love to hear some of the feedback. How do we approach conducting that kind of survey that would make you comfortable enough to trust us, to open up and share some of this confidential information? Now, maybe before that, we kind of need to let you know how that process of our survey looks like, right? So when we look at our well-being assessments, the idea is that person logs in to their kind of confidential dashboard, and they have series of assessments that allows you to kind of measure your capacity to maintain your health and well-being in a very different areas of your life. So instead of saying, as you know, like mental health, the way it's measured is wrong in so many levels, right? Because it really looks at the symptoms. It's, it asks, how long, are you feeling blue? How long are you feeling blue? Here's your depression. But actually it doesn't look why, why all of these causes of you feeling this way. So this is exactly where we want to fill that gap. We want to highlight that awareness and put that confidence and knowledge back into each person's hands, that they will say, I know why I feel this way, and I have tools and resources that can guide me right back on track so I can do something about it. It's up to me. So the idea is that person completes those assessments in those different areas of their life, in emotional, social, cognitive, and physical aspects of well-being. And there is also a big part of identity sitting in the middle, overlapping all of that. And then based on your results and based on your responses, you will have some free resources, information, recommendations, exercises that can just help you to guide you back on track with what you want to achieve, but also kind of build on your strengths and help you to overcome some of your challenges and weaknesses. And sometimes it could be helping you to build some resources and access to things if you didn't know that that kind of support is out there. And sometimes it's building your resourcefulness. So for example, you might have access to support networks, but you are not confident talking about specific problems and issues. So we need to know which one to build, right? So we build that survey. Then there are some of these free recommendations and resources that help you to regain that confidence and ownership of your own life. Based on those as well, you can then be directed to other specialists and for the other support, and also to purchase some other services from other experts in our network that are vetted, quality checked, often trained by us, and so on. So that's kind of the whole process, that at the moment, if somebody is not feeling well, or if you are struggling with your mental health issues for the first time in your life, where do you go? Where do you even start? Because mental health via public route is very inaccessible. It can be hit and miss. The availability of what kind of support you will have will depend on, it's a bit of a postcode lottery, right? Based on where you live and what kind of specialists are available around you. But also it's very limited. It's pretty much limited to, CBT, counseling, and medication. And if you are suffering, no one's really doing the full checks of your gut health, of your relationships, of your financial status, all of these things that then affect how you feel, right? That cannot be fixed through medication. So we really want to have like one-stop shop for a starting point for person to first become aware of where they are and what they need. And second, to really give them choice of that direction for how exactly they want to help themselves, and where it goes beyond what they can do themselves, that they can be directed to these specific resources that are now specifically tailored to their problems, to their needs, and it's actually matched to their life circumstances, and so on. So that's kind of in a nutshell the solution that we are building. And this is a huge mission, right? Because we're building an entirely new ecosystem of support that requires access to public. It requires building new technology. It requires this tremendous amount of research. And this is exactly what we are doing now with Valentina, to really define what exactly we measure and how, and what is the best way to present that data, package that in the technology, and take it to the access to organizations, to employers, so that everyone can have this. We really believe that every person has a right to have this level of self-awareness, to have those resources. So with our backgrounds and academic research, we want to take it out of those labs and take it to the people, and make it accessible, make it translate some of this neuroscience knowledge into human language, that people can understand how our minds, brains, and bodies work, and really be able to do something about it. So so that's in a nutshell. So how do we go about asking those questions in the right way, that you would be willing to open up, and that you would be willing to share that information confidently? What is it that maybe we need to be aware of or include in some of those checks? And even though all of our results are confidential, each survey would then be reviewed by a specialist at some point, because that data, let's say if we have that coaching call with that person, you need to have specific access to that data. So most of it is processed completely via the technology, and some of those recommendations and matching algorithms are done through AI and machine learning. But at some point, when we are assigning now that person to the coach, therapist, advisor, whatever specialist that they would need, nutritionist, personal trainer, we need to know what information we should share with that person. So there's a lot of dilemmas there, I guess, to address, and how to do it right. And the difficulties that we are sharing here with you so openly probably explains reasons why most of these assessments are crap, right? Because actually it's so difficult to get it right. But
Exactly.
we'll get there. We are on that mission to do all that we can to build that trust, to build right evidence-based research, to validate the questions, the answers, the algorithms, and then use via that technology. So yeah, it should be accessible to all and free. And yeah, we were talking actually before that, Valentina, we were talking about Google, right? This week, something happened with my Google account access. If anybody has any contacts on Google, please send them my way, because I had Google account for nearly 20 years, and now it's been blocked because they couldn't verify my identity for some reason. So I've lost all the access to the payments, to our team storage drives where we have all of our research, right? So we were talking about, how actually in this modern world, how much we're dependent on these kind of types of technologies. So yeah, we definitely don't want to build exactly the same
No.
ecosystem and the same problem. We want to give right back to the people where, maybe when you complete that assessment and you complete the data, some of it could be completely confidential, and maybe some of it would be just matched, some of those recommendations would be just matched by AI algorithms. So you are given the right information. And then in a way, like, I don't know, on LinkedIn profile, you have these toggles, what do you want to share and what notifications you want to get. Maybe in exactly the same way, it's an option to choose what pieces of data I'm happy to share with, relevant professionals or coaches, if that support is assigned to me, and which of those bits are
I
completely
think
confidential for me, right?
absolutely. I think that's the way we're moving as a society, being able to make those choices about what we do and don't feel comfortable sharing. And I think that same kind of model can be used here, and giving people that choice. And also knowing that if you change your mind later and you're happy to share information about something else to receive support about it, then you can do. But I think it's also really important to acknowledge when somebody is kind of in a frame of mind where they're open to and willing to receive support for something that might be close or difficult for them, and when they're not. And if somebody isn't in that frame of mind, then there's no use trying to kind of push someone forward into something that they're uncomfortable about, because you can cause more harm than good.
Yeah. And maybe even, sharing specific pieces of information with specific people, right? Because you might, if you have, let's say, I don't know, now you have a sexual relationships coach that you would like to engage with and work, you might want to share that piece of information just with them, but
Yeah.
not with anyone else, right? So choosing each piece of data and piece of information that has those filters of confidentiality, sharing, and different visibility filters, that must be the way, right? And that's how we should all own our health data, our when we go to the GP and we get our blood test done, or we get some other health checks done, having that right to own that data for ourselves, and we are in charge how it's supposed to be used, and that
Yeah.
there's no other way. We have to give power back to people to own their own data.
Absolutely. And I think especially with these kinds of things, so there's so many industries built off just consuming and essentially mining this data from people, and including health data and really sensitive topics. And I think it's just really important to set ourselves apart from that. When we're not profiting, we're not selling the data, it's the service. It's about being able to understand and gain that self-awareness. And like we were saying before, we don't want to create a dependency culture. In fact, the exact opposite, we want to create an independency culture, but essentially one that gives you the resources and the resourcefulness to kind of maintain those capacities for well-being on your own, but with the connections of your community and of the resources or specialists that we might link you up with. But realistically, we want these interventions to be as short term as possible, because the idea is that you're developing those skills and capacities. And within the NHS, obviously, there's a lot of interventions that are too short term and maybe need to be a bit longer term. But I think also the difficulty there is that they're so can be too specialized. Like we've been
Yeah.
saying before, that it doesn't take into account the whole picture of your well-being in terms of your physical health, your circumstances in your life, and your mental health. And I know that there's so many mental health practitioners of all sorts, who, it can be so frustrating when you're working with somebody and you can see the circumstances in their life that is really, really dramatically exacerbating the problem, but that's not your area of expertise. That's not what
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
supporting.
and then you don't know what to do about this, right? So
Exactly.
from our perspective, building that ecosystem of support of specialists in one place where you can refer people and you have resources to support them in a right way. And at the end of the day, I think this another important thing that you are highlighting is not creating dependencies for that individual on something or someone else for you to feel better, right?
Mm.
And that's unfortunately the current case in most of mental health support, right? We're expecting, and I think just we live in this kind of society where expect someone to do something for us, right? The government should do something for us, NHS should do something for us, if they are over the budget, then all these amazing charities that somebody's gonna you know rescue me, kind of thing. So when you think about this, people don't actually have, with surveys, guys, that we have completed, most people don't have a budget for their own health, right? And think for yourself, do you have a budget? What's your budget for maintaining your own health, right? Do you have a budget? No, most people don't. Very, very few people have specific investment that they are investing in their constant growth, in their own development, in their own learning. And otherwise we'll say, yeah, I'm paying 50 quid for my health insurance, so that's it, that covers everything. But really, do you have a budget for investing in yourself, in building your resilience, in your health, your well-being for the long term? So what we are really trying to build is this capacity for each person to maintain their own health and well-being, so that when things happen, you are not left in this position where you don't get help, you don't have access to support, and you don't have budget for it either, so you are left without support. And those dependencies that are being created is that people are on medication, let's say on antidepressant medication, for years, for decades sometimes. You completely dependent, your life completely dependent on this medication, because simply you are not given other options.
Mm.
You don't know of any other options, because that's the only option that's been given to you by that person who prescribed you that medication, right?
Mm.
So many people that I know as well that come to me as well, they say, oh, I'm really good, I'm taking care of myself, I've been doing therapy for 10 years. You've been doing therapy for 10 years and you're still not getting better, then there's something seriously wrong with that type of therapy, right? Because there is all very well to constantly look to grow and improve, but we should not need to depend on someone else just to feel happy and healthy, right?
Mm.
Therefore, like our ways of working and all of our elite mind coaches and people who we work with in our academy, we have very strict protocol that people don't pay you for your time. They pay you for the value that you provide and for the support and the outcomes that you deliver. And if that person, and if you can't prove and measure those impact validated outcomes, that your help is actually helping this person, and there is a clear deadline for what you're trying to achieve with them in those 3 6 months, 12 months, whatever period of support that we're offering to that person, we shouldn't charge them. I
Yeah.
think it's just ethically wrong to be profiting from somebody else's misfortune. So if
Mm.
I'm as a therapist having a client for 10 years, I that would be against all of my all of my values.
Absolutely, because you'd be constantly assessing. If I was trying to make my coffee for 40 minutes even, I'd be thinking, well, maybe I should go back to the drawing board and start doing it differently. It's, and take that same logic and think you wouldn't keep doing anything over and over and over again if it's obviously not having the results that you intend. And I think we need to take the same approach with therapies, with medications, all of these things. Obviously there are chronic conditions that can require a lot more intensive
Yeah,
support, and
absolutely. Yeah.
that's different. But if we're looking at just kind of everyday things that can often be mitigated by changing other circumstances in our lives, looking at our lifestyles, looking at our mental health and well-being practices, looking at our physical health practices, our workloads, etc., etc. And a lot of these things we can shift around if we choose to prioritize our health.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time people don't want to prioritize their health because we are living in a society that really pushes you and pushes you towards valuing yourself based on productivity and based on capitalist success, essentially. And so it's really hard. It can be really, really hard to prioritize your health. And I think that's something that we'd really like to change, that whole culture around it being, giving people the tools to be able to prioritize their health. Because I think often as well, it can seem like a really steep hill to climb when we're given very, very little education in our schooling system and very little structured, substantial, in-depth information that is also accessible in our public media to really look after ourselves in a way that's unbiased and in a way that kind of is inclusive and accessible for all sorts of lifestyles and identities. So I think that's something that we're kind of like to be contributing to, is giving people those skills and the awareness of themselves and the knowledge, these resources that we share. That's education. It's not supporting in that one directional sense. It's education and information that has to also be taken on board, understood and practiced, which I think that's where the skills develop. And then that's when this initiative into your health becomes a long-term investment that will end up saving you, time, money, negative emotions, stress in the future, rather than kind of essentially paying for someone or something to do it for you.
Absolutely. It's all about self-awareness, confidence to challenge sometimes the status quo and some of those kind of ineffective ways of how support is currently being delivered. But most importantly is to break those links of dependencies of somebody else needing to rescue and save you, because actually you are not given right education, tools and knowledge to be able to do it yourself. So then you feel like you have no other option but to be in therapy for 10 years. You have no other option but to be dependent on this one medication for the rest of your life, right? And it might be the right choice. And, I think for some people, it is the right decision for as long as you have consciously chosen to do that and you know what exactly you are getting out of it and you know how to measure that success, right? Then it is the right decision. But if you are only doing that because you think that that's the only option you have, then there's clearly something wrong with the lack of information and the ecosystem that is just maintaining that status quo and potentially profiting from somebody's inability to look after themselves, right? Absolutely. So we are on that big mission building that word. I'm just aware of the time, so I think it's just been over half an hour, and it's really, really interesting to be doing this kind of work, and there's so many more challenges that we are discovering when we start digging into this research. So I hope you guys who are listening are appreciating us sharing this openly and raising some of those challenges, because I think very often we don't know what's happening behind the closed doors of, those other businesses, of other startups, of the innovation, of the healthcare system. So we really want to be as transparent as possible and highlight those and share those insights and conversations of how we are building those solutions, the concerns that are out there, and what is it exactly that we are doing to address them. So you're aware of that too. And also we want you to be involved in that process, right? So how exactly we're supposed to be approaching some of those things? What are the specific features? What are the specific access of support? What is missing for you? Is there any specific piece of information or maybe some specific practical tool that you would like us to give you to be able to do something, right? We want to hear this from you. So please type in the comments any thoughts, questions, suggestions, so we can look into this. We have this capacity for research and access to resources, and we are really doing this because we want to make it available and accessible to everyone. So ask and it will be given.
Exactly. Wonderful.
So thanks, Valentina. I will see you next week. And yes, let's dig into our next challenges, and let's keep building this wonderful world that we want to be living in.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Evelina. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and looking forward to chatting next week.
Great. Wonderful. Have a lovely weekend, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.